Welcome to another episode of Dad Up, everyone. Thank you guys very much for joining me. This is another exciting guest that I have on today, and he and I have just recently connected. I'm looking forward to getting to know a little bit more about him and about his experiences of parenting with his boys. But my good friend Jeff Nelligan is joining me on Dad Up. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Man, it's a privilege to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for being on. Um, you know, let's just dive right in. I don't know a lot about your backstory. I know a little bit based on some of the stuff that the research that I did, but I don't know a lot about your backstory. Let's kind of go back and how Jeff kind of grew up and the things that he's doing now. Obviously, you've written a number of books, but the things you're doing now, and then we'll dive into the relationship with your boys.
Sure. Hey, like we were talking about earlier, grew up in California and went to school on the East Coast and always wanted to be in politics. My mom is involved in politics. So I started at about 7 years old, knocking on doors with her. And she would always say, it's always better to bring along a kid because you never get the door slammed in your face. So I probably walked half the precincts of LA County when I was, before the age of 12. Um, Worked in politics, worked for three members of Congress on Capitol Hill, got two presidential appointments, one with State Department, one with HHS, Health and Human Services. Worked on a bunch of national campaigns as an advance man. But the most important thing, had three sons and was, blessed to be a dad.
Yeah, that's awesome. How old are your boys now? Because I know they're older.
Sure. 28, 27, and 24.
Okay. All right. Well, we're it's very similar. My boys are 25 and 22, so very
Yeah.
close. So you and I have been around the what I like to call the parenting block a little bit. How was your overall relationship with your boys growing up?
It was always good. I was fortunate because, you were talking to Peterson earlier in one of your blogs, and he mentioned the word strategy in parenting. And, Boudreau mentioned the converse, which is parent apathy, which I just love that term, and you got it out of him. I had a strategy from day one on how I wanted the kids to develop into, strong, productive, alert adults. And so the strategy was key. And it started, three or four when they were young and old enough, cognitively to understand what was going on. And I never let up on the gas the entire time. And now, of course, they're at that age, 28, 27, like your kids.
Mhm.
And the values and the character and the traits that I wanted to instill in them at 3 and 4 are totally visible today at the ages they are now.
Mm, that's awesome. And that's just a testament to not only you, but their relationship with you and their mother, right? I mean, their relationship
Yes.
with both of you guys. So that's awesome. And I know that for you, working in Congress, I mean, you're constantly, whether you're traveling or just the hours that you put in, how did you figure out a way to devote both time to, your job, your career, and also to your family?
Sure. I mean, that's part of the strategy. You know, you, I always, people always will say, well, what are the three actionable items that I can take away if my kid's 6 or 7 or 10 and I have, a high pressure job in DC or in any city,
Mhm.
Ontario, New York, San
Mhm.
Francisco, Chicago. Said this is what the strategy means. It means you have to spend at least an hour a day with them, just the three of you, the two of you, the four of you, the five of you. And you have to fit that in. If that means getting up early in the morning to knock out work or leaving in the middle of the day from DC to drive 30 miles to a seventh grade lacrosse game and then driving back into the city to continue the work till 8, you've got to do it. And it's too easy. You go back to Boudreau to have that apathy about, well, I'll do it next time, or
Mhm.
I'll, the strategy is not there, so I'll work it in somehow. People don't understand, Brian, that 75% of the time that we spend with our boy or girl is spent by the time the kid is 12 years old.
Right.
and 90% is spent by the time they're 18.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't raise them in those periods of time, the culture will raise them and the society will raise them. And I don't think there's a reasonable parent or dad listening to this right now who thinks that having the culture raise their kid is a very good idea.
Right. No, absolutely. If there is, shame on them, but I will say you're right.
Yeah.
When it comes to that 75%, I know parents will go, wait a minute. I'm around my boys, I'm around my kids until they're at least 18, maybe even 20,
Yeah.
21. Why is it 75%? Well, here's why. Because when your kids hit around the age of 12, and this is what Jeff's talking about, when your kids hit around the age of 12, between the ages of 12 and 18, they're really trying to figure out who they are, and they're really trying to own their own identity. So what they want to do is
Right.
separate themselves. It's natural. Start to separate themselves from their parents, particularly the dad for the boys and the mom for the girls. You know, they start to separate themselves from their parents because they want to have that little bit of independence. So you start to feel like you're being left out, or like they don't love you anymore, like they don't want you a part of their life. That's not it at
Yeah.
all. It happened with my boys. My boys were like, they're so into everything I was doing until they start hitting those teenage years. And it's like, whoa, dad, hold on. I'm going to go hang out with this guy. I want to do this. I don't like doing that anymore. That's not kind of my thing. I really not. You can't take offense by that. They're just trying to figure out who they are. So that's why it's 75% up to the age of 12. And then the rest of it, the up to the age of 18. Now, I will give you a bit of good news, parents, that in between those years, it's going to feel like a struggle. It's going to feel like, you know, it's a tug of war between you and your children. And then when they start to hit the age of 18, then they know it all. They start to think, hey, I don't need mom and dad. I know it all. And then they start to hit the age of 20, 21, and they go, mom and dad are right. And they start to come back. They start to kind of
Yeah.
reel in that relationship again. Now, they'll only do that. And I've just kind of gone off a little tangent here, but they'll only do that if you've created that bond, that loving relationship throughout their lives as they grew up. If you were separated from them as they were growing up, the likelihood of them coming back
Yeah.
to you and relying on you is this very slim chance of that happening. But I did that with my boys. My boys were very connected with me. Me and my wife and I, particularly, they're very connected with us. And my two boys, like your boys, my two boys are two of my best friends today. And so I just, I know I ran off a little tangent there. I was just kind of wanted to explain a little bit about what Jeff was talking about. But your boys in particular, I mean, I think it's remarkable that all three of them went in the military. I commend them, thank them for their service. Thank you for your service as well. I was in the military, I spent 4 years in the Marines. Was that just something that just came up, like they wanted to be in, or did you have to talk to them about it? What was the case with that?
Certainly, you know, and I love the timeline that you explained earlier. It's ideal. And I'll add something to that.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that attachment with your kid by the age of 12 or 14, by the time they're 24, 42% of them are going to be back living at your house in the basement, getting good at Minecraft.
Right.
And that sounds harsh. That's the truth. That's 42% of kids between the ages of 18 and 30 are at home. In terms of the military, you know, you mentioned that your kids were involved in sports. My kids, I involved them in sports at an early age because sports teaches you three basic things. Number one, it's the camaraderie of being on a team. And you may not like a couple guys in the team, but you still got to get along with them. The second thing is, if you want to be on the field, you've got to exercise that personal discipline to get better. Because if you don't have that personal discipline, you're going to be riding the bench until you're in 12th grade, if you even make it that far.
Mm-hmm.
The third thing about sports is adversity. I love a game. At the end, there's a winner and there's a loser. And if you're comfortable with being that loser, man, you know, life's gonna trample on you. That's just the way it is. Again, it's, you know, harsh medicine, but that's the way it works. With those kind of values, the military has a lot of that. Mm-hmm. And you were a Marine. I mean, my kids weren't tough enough to be Marines, so they went Navy and Army. But all those things, the three values that I just kind of enunciated, are visible in, you know, in any kind of military service. You're around a bunch of guys. You have a mission or a task you've got to complete, no matter if you like the guys or not. And you're judged. If you don't make the mark, this isn't, the military isn't some kind of woke system where everyone gets a trophy or there's an excuse at the end
Right.
or everyone's in it to have fun. There are consequences. And my sons loved being in that arena of consequences, whether it was on an athletic team or in a classroom, whatever. They liked the competition. And but the athletic metaphor is too easy because it can be in anything. It can be in the marching band, it can be in a theater production, it can be in the robotics club, the scouts, whatever brings kids together with a shared goal.
Yeah. And for adults, it could be in the corporate world, that
Oh yeah.
level of competition. And I think when it comes to the military, yeah, there's a set of guidelines that you have to follow, and there are
Yeah.
consequences if you don't. And if God forbid, if your boys go into war and they don't follow the rules that they're supposed to follow, the consequences could be somebody could get killed, either them or their comrades, right? They could end up losing a life over a mistake that they made. So it's very serious when it comes to particularly the military, that you follow the set of guidelines and you follow this particular order. And it's great that I love the fact that they're that competitive and into that, but it's remarkable. And for you being in the military, how many years did you serve, and what was your MLS?
Sure. I was 14 years in the Army Reserve and then the Guard. And I was just, basic administrative officer and infantryman. And I did my infantry training at Fort Benning. And, that's some of the greatest lessons I learned were from a drill sergeant in the middle of summer in Georgia in a swamp, and drill sergeant Harrison, this big black badass, combat vet, just saying, we're gonna these. If you're 5 minutes early, you're late.
Right.
You know, if you have one job in your life as a soldier, you assess, adapt, and advance.
Uh-huh.
And so, learning these early on, boy, those are for life. And so, that kind of attitude and development kind of carried over into the raising of the sons. And, it's worked thus far. And you're right. If, you look at my kids are all Gen Z, right at the cusp, 96, 95, all the way till now. And Gen Z has a real problem right now. Kids that are getting right out of college, there's been 3 different surveys of these hiring managers trying to recruit these kids: Forbes, Resume Builder, and Market Watch. And the conclusion of all the surveys is that about 6 out of 10 of new hires to a corporation or any kind of firm or business are late to work. That 55% of them are fired before the first year is up. And that 34% of these kids coming out of college to interview for their first job, they bring their parents to the interview. 1 out of 3 kids coming out of college bring their parents to their first interview with a hiring manager.
Yeah.
So you can say a lot about Gen Z. Those are the stats. Those are the facts. So, that change has got to begin early. And that goes back to the podcast you did about 4 weeks ago about accountability, holding kids accountable young. And when they do fail, that they can come to you and you can give them, the real deal rather than, being a snowplow for them through their entire life.
Yeah. And my wife has experienced that same kind of situation. And she's a school teacher, been a school teacher for almost 20 years. And she's experienced that same kind of situation with the kids that she teaches, where, the parents, she has to deal so much with the parents because they're not allowing their child to face, consequences or deal with their own situations. The parents are stepping in and trying to rescue their kids. And I guarantee you, parents, you are setting your kids up for failure by doing that. I'm not saying let your kid stumble and fall and hit his face on the pavement and not able to get up. I'm not saying that. Don't let your child get to a point where they're not able to help themselves. But what I am saying is, When you need to step in, that's the only time that you need to step in. The rest of the time, they should handle it themselves. My boys in particular, when it come to school or when it come to sports, if they had an issue, they would typically tell me about it. Well, Dad, I got this going on, and this teacher said that, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, have you talked to your teacher about it yet? No. Why? Well, I don't know. Well, you need to talk to your teacher. And until
Yeah.
you do, I'm not going to step in. This is a what I used to call a you problem. You've got to learn how to handle this. And nowadays, that's not the case, right? Nowadays, it's like mom and dad have to come, like you said, bringing a parent to an interview. Good Lord. Can you imagine? Can you imagine in our day if we brought our parent to an interview? Holy cow. Uh, it's funny. I did some interviews. This is about 2 years ago. I had a position I was hiring for, and I interviewed about 20 something people. And in the course of those interviews, I think 75% of them or so, this is just a rough estimate, but 75% of them or so wanted to know if they could work remote. And that's obviously because of the pandemic and how that kind of stuff had
Yeah.
evolved, right? And where I was, we were in the office work environment. I said, absolutely not. This is not, no, we're not remote working. That's not the case. This is in the office every day, Monday through Friday. And you'll be surprised at how many of those people that asked me that said, oh, okay, then, I don't, yeah, I'm not interested then. Well, I'm glad you told me that up
Yeah.
front. I'm glad you told me that up front because I would have hated to have gotten into hiring you and then find out later that you need to work remote. So my son, my older son right now, he's about 4 years out of college. He has not, Jeff, he has not worked a day in the office in his life. Like he started
Oh man,
working
that's not
for,
good.
I know he started working for a
Whoa.
company 6 months before he graduated college, and they worked, and he's remote, 100% remote. And he's now moved on to the third company. He's, promoting and moving up the chain. So he's now on to his third company and still 100% remote. And I try to tell him, dude, you need some interaction with some people, even if it's
Oh
one day a week in the office to kind of interact with colleagues and stuff. You really need that because even these kind of meetings where you're virtual over the phone, they're just not the same as this face-to-face contact with people. And it worries me, it worries me as a parent to see
oh yeah.
the way our kids are growing up now and how they're exposed to how easy things are now for them that, my older son's like, he's like, thinks it's no big deal. He thinks it's like, that's how it is when he knows his dad has been in corporate America for 30 years. He knows his dad worked Monday through Friday for 30 years. You know what I mean? So it's just,
Oh
it's
yeah.
just amazing to me. It's just amazing to me.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, we have a lot of people. I mean, I see a lot of people and I hear stories. I mean, I talk with dozens of parents and kids every week, and the parents will tell me about a kid who's working remote, or the kid will say, I'm doing this 4 days a week. And even in my own workplace, the same thing happens. And I go back to 68% are late to meetings, or a third of them bring their parents to the interview. This sense of isolation is just is overwhelming. And by the time a kid is 30, if he's been working in his PJs on his fanny in a an apartment, he or she's going to become psychotic.
Yeah.
They will not want to be in the public sphere. Thank God my three are constantly around people, hundreds of people every day, beginning like
Mm-hmm.
about 6 o'clock in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And they resisted the whole remote thing during COVID, and because of the jobs they had in terms of the service, there was no way that, you're on a ship of 257 guys.
Yeah.
Guess what? You know, you don't you
Suck it
don't
up.
do remote work for a guided missile destroyer.
Right.
It just doesn't happen.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
boy, I hope your son can, break out of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
The good news is he has, he doesn't live at home. So that's one thing. He lives with one of his best friends from college. They have a house together. They rented a house together. So he's away from home. That's number one. Number two, he's got a good core of friends around him that he's able to
Yeah.
connect with and hang out with and stuff. It's just the work environment's just really, really different. And I could not work remote. I just can't do it. I would be distracted at home. I just would.
Oh yeah.
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 Um, let's dive into your book a little bit. I know we got a little bit of time left, so I want to dive into most recent book about obviously about the pandemic, but I want to dive into the one with your boys and learning for resilience through them. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. I reached a point that, as you were discussing earlier, when the last kid left and I drove him up to West Point and dropped him off for this, painful thing, plebe summer. And I drove back and I was sitting on my back porch with a big old cigar and, bunch of Red Bulls. And I was just looking out going, man, talk about a void. No more games to go to. No more showing up at the school to volunteer for something. That's all gone. And I said, I've got these 3 kids that are in service, and I'm so disappointed by how Gen Z is in general. And I know I sound like a crazy old man, but guess what? The stats are there to back me up that they're just not having a really good, productive time. And so I said, I'm going to write a quick, short book on the things that were most important in terms of raising kids, and it came down to 4 things: personal courtesy, confidence, resilience in adversity, and ambition. Those are the 4 things. If you have that strategy, like Peterson was talking about, then you're going to have that kid at 18 or 23 who's not with mom and dad at the interview headquarters. And so that's the genesis of the book. And I was lucky, NPR picked it up, and then different blogs, Fatherly, Parenting, LetGrow, all these different places picked it up. So I did a second edition just last fall. And again, it's not a 350-pound coffee table anchor. It's a 40-minute read and it's about 80 pages. So it's easy to get through, and it's kind of loose and humorous. It's just like I am now. There's no, the authenticity is there. At my age, you don't have to worry about what you say. So that was the reason, though, and very similar to what you did starting the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, it's one of those things where I've had many people tell me, you need to write a book, and I've started, and it's one of those things where I'm busy, like you, I'm busy, and
Yeah,
exactly. I have so many things going on that it's like trying to devote even an hour a day to letting my mind kind of put on paper what I'm thinking about parenting. It's hard to do without a real set, I guess, outline. And I just can't sit down and just start writing. I know there are plenty of authors that can do that. I just can't do that. And for me,
well, you're running a podcast. I mean, that's probably more valuable than putting it on paper, because you're reaching untold numbers of dads.
Right. And that's kind of my point. It's like on the podcast, I can talk about all this parenting stuff. It just kind of flows naturally, but writing it on paper, I feel like it's just me and the piece of paper. And I just can't, I haven't gotten into that part of it yet. But it'll get there. But that's awesome. And have your boys read it? And if so, what were their opinions about it? And
yeah, luckily I gave them a copy right before I sent it to my publisher. And I said, look, you look this over, man. Did the old man get it right? And all 3 of them read it, and they all came back and they said, yeah, that's pretty much how it happened. So, everything in the book, there's nothing contrived, or there's no anecdotes that are twisted. I mean, it all happened. And let me tell you, there's a lot of bad stuff in that book. I take a lot of shots at myself because you're a dad, and every dad listening, there are ups and downs. Yeah, I got 3 military officers, and they went to incredible schools, and they're pretty upright guys. At the same time, they could go south in 5 minutes. I could get a phone call and something bad has happened, but guess what? They've been doing this their entire lives. They'll recover. But their reaction was, yeah, that's how it happened. And so, but the values that you teach early, before that 12 years, they sustain themselves. So, like a kid is on the bridge driving a guided missile destroyer in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf at night, surrounded by mines and Iranian patrol boats. And, one slip and the whole ship is gone.
Right.
But if you learned enough and you've done enough throughout your life, those kind of incidents come up and you don't fold and you don't panic. And there's examples like that through all of what they've done in their careers and in college, etc. So I guess what I'm saying is, for every dad, yeah, there are times when it just seems like it's hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
But that's when you, like your accountability podcast, but that's the time when you become authentic and genuine with them.
Yeah. And that's learned behavior. I think that for parenting, for being a dad in particular, it's hard for us to admit when we're wrong. It's hard for us to admit our faults and our weaknesses. Dads don't like to be weak or looked at as weak. And that's what we think when we make these errors or these mistakes in parenting when it comes to raising our kids. Trust me, I've made plenty of mistakes in my life raising my boys. And to this day, I still make mistakes. So that's just part of the journey of parenting. But what's cool is the more that you can recognize it and the more that you can learn from it, and the more that you can, the more you apologize to your kids and say, listen, I messed up, that shows them that you're human and it's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from them and try to grow from them. And I
totally agree.
I think for a lot of kids, that is learned behavior. If you're not owning your mistakes as a parent, you're saying it's my way or the highway. I don't care what I did. You're going to do as I say. Those kind of things that's going to get you things with your kids when they get older in their years. When life hits them on the chin, they're not going to own their mistakes. They're going to repeat exactly what you just showed them because it's learned behavior.
And the last story in the book is, the height of authenticity. And I'll just bring it up quickly because the dads are looking at the profile of the book and the kids and what they're doing. And they're going, oh, this guy had a freaking, parade ride of champagne and roses. We used to drive around the Washington, D.C. area all throughout it. And there's just huge faceless, soulless buildings everywhere, multi-story, 20, 30 stories, and glass and steel and iron and brick. And we drive around and we were always fascinated by them. And, the kids would always be interested in them. And finally, one day we're doing it downtown. And I said, something, I got to make a point to you guys. And you need to listen hard here. And I said, up there on that 7th floor of that building, there's a guy sitting looking at a screen, and he's got a picture of his family on his wall, and he's got a mug on his desk like you made me in 2nd grade. And, this guy was going to be somebody. He was going to be a jet pilot or own a real estate firm or chain of restaurants or sail around the world. And instead, he's looking at this stupid screen and he's going, what the hell am I doing here? And I said, that guy's your old man. So you have got to get farther than I have. Shock. Not a word was said all the way driving back home, but it was profound because they understood ambition is essential. And, Dad had a good run, but guess what? It's not good enough. And that's the kind of genuineness. And like going back to your podcast, that's the kind of honesty you have to have with your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us as parents, we always want our kids to strive to be better. Why do we want our kids to be us? We don't want our kids to be us. We're our own. And you comparing yourself to somebody else, I want to be just like that. Why would you want to be just like that person? Be your own person. Try to be better. Try to strive to be better. I want my boys to far exceed what I've done in my life. You know what? If they do, I will be their biggest fan cheering them on along the way. Trust me. But it all comes down to how well you've raised them and how well you've brought them up and the lessons you've taught them and the ownership that they take throughout their life. And for you, Jeff, and your boys, it sounds like that was the right path that you guys took. You guys took the right path as far as parenting and as far as being a father-son relationship. You guys took the right path, and look where it's gotten you today. So that's awesome.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, listen, for your books, what's the best place for my listeners to look you up, learn a little bit more about your books, all that kind of stuff?
Sure. Website is nelliganbooks.com. And I'm on Twitter, Resilient Sons, and Facebook page is Jeff Nelligan Books. And Instagram is Nelligan_books. And the best place is www.nelliganbooks.com. It shows different blogs I've written for different websites and newspapers and magazines and podcasts and all that. And also it has the books on there as well.
Cool. Awesome. Well, listen, Jeff, I am thrilled and thankful that you were on today. Thanks for sharing the stuff that you did about not only your career, but also the stuff that the way that you raised your boys and your relationship with them. I'm looking forward to continuing our friendship. So you and I are going to definitely stay in touch, but I really appreciate you being on,
man.
my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me. A privilege, pal.
Yeah, awesome. Listen, guys, it's been another episode of Dad Up. Thanks again to my good friend, Jeff Nelligan, for being on. If you want to check out his books, maybe for learn a little bit more about him, the links are in the show notes. So please make sure you do that. You can order his books there. You can check them out. You can go on Amazon and order them there. But please make sure you do that and give him a follow too. Learn a little bit more about him. But as always, guys, if you have not yet subscribed to my show, please make sure you do that so you don't miss any of the awesome guests I have on each and every week. And as always, I look forward to seeing you all on the next episode of Dad Up. Wow, another amazing episode in the books. So much was shared, and I'm truly grateful my guest was able to pour into you to help you elevate your dad game and really dad up. Make sure you bang that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And while you're here, please don't forget to leave me a rating and a review. I always appreciate the feedback. And one last thing, don't forget, your role as a dad is one of the most important roles you have. So if you need a little help or have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website at daduptribe.com or at my Instagram page at daduppodcast. Until next time, everyone, Dad Up.